Okay, so this one is a little tricky one because employee first is a very basic need in today's time, but it is as complex as we get into the real employee first environment discussion. Okay. So, in my view, and what I've experienced in my journey, it is looked at very differently over the time, right? And I think the way most organizations approach it is exactly the way gap lies. I think it is not a principle, it is not a policy which is implemented once in a blue moon. But I think it is a series of everyday design choices, right? And it is made at every level that either reinforces or quietly contradicts what the organization claims to stand for, right? And in today's world, every organization, every leader will have that intent of being employee first. But the real question is the intent demonstrated, right? And that gap between intent and experience is where the trust is actually built or erodes. So now the two things which comes to my mind, which becomes very essential of creating an employee first environment. One is predictability, and I think predictability plays a very important role because when people can anticipate how the decisions are made, how performance gets evaluated, how their day will unfold, right? They feel a sense of comfort. They see a sense of control and familiarity, right? The moment it becomes inconsistent or the situation dependent, they don't know how my day will look like today, how my manager will behave today. That is the time when the experience or the trust starts eroding, not loudly but steadily. So that is one thing which we as an organization should keep in mind, that how predictable we are, right? I think one of the quotes which I read, the only time unpredictably will help you win is when you're in a war. And obviously we are not in a war situation in corporate life. So how predictable we can be, how predictable our behavior can be. That is something which helps build trust in the employee's mind. The second point on building an employee first experience is how the friction gets absorbed. I think the key is every organization is going through a lot of trade-offs, a trade-off between speed and consistency, trade-off of cost and people, and a lot of other trade-offs, right? Every system, every organization will have gaps, maybe because of unclear processes, last minute changes, some structural inefficiencies, right? But the important question to answer here is, do employees constantly adjust to those gaps? Or the organizations also take accountability to reduce those gaps, right? And I think the honest truth that doesn't get said enough is generally people first organizations are the ones which are willing to occasionally choose what's right on their people, even when it comes to something which is costing them short term. I'll start by saying that engagement, in my view at least, is the most confusing word in corporate, right? And why I say this, because in my 13 years of experience, what I have seen and how my thought process has matured through years is something which is very interesting in terms of engagement, that the efforts and outcome slowly are drifting apart, right? People are putting in their work genuinely but not seeing enough movement. Good performance doesn't change much, feedback doesn't lead to visible actions, right? Issues raised 6 months ago are still issues today. At that point, people don't disengage emotionally, they recalibrate their behavior. They stop investing discretionary efforts because discretionary efforts have stopped producing visible returns. It is a rational response to a broken feedback loop. And this will happen to every and anybody in the organization, however talented, however high potential, high performing employee he or she may be, right? But let's take one step further on this one, right? I think we have been measuring engagement. Almost every organization have these pulse surveys, their annual engagement surveys, right? But engagement surveys always does not tell us what the real picture is, right? They will tell us how people feel on the day they fill out the form, right? What they don't tell us is whether people feel their work matters to the team, to the customer, to something larger than the task. There is a difference between being engaged and being invested. Engagement and engagement is not very shallow as measured in these engagement surveys, right? Engaged people show up, invested people bring their best when they show up, right? And what creates investment isn't satisfaction, it is meaning in what they are doing, meaning in what they are contributing, and are they actually seeing that meaning being used in something tangible in the organization. So, in my view, instead of asking how do we motivate people more, the far more powerful question is where is effort not translating into meaningful progress, and where is work not connecting to something that is meaningful. So, I think this is what to me uh, recipe. I'll not say recipe, but at least in my mind, I'm clear in terms of how we create more engaged and more invested workforce rather than just getting the pulse service filled out and patting our own back that we have the most engaged workforce in the country. That leadership is tested when things are not going your way, right? When things are not straightforward, right? When there is ambiguity, pressure, competing priorities, and no clean answer is there, right? And that is when a real leader's capability will show up. So the first thing which I personally feel and have tried to practice is the judgment, right? The ability to take a call without a perfect information and then fully own it, right? And while doing that, equally important is how that decision lands, right? People in your team will not expect every decision to be right, right? But what they would at least expect and deserve is that decision is understandable and has a right rational behind it. So I think that is the first thing. How do you make your decision making? The second thing is, again, I'll go back to the predictability part of it, the consistency in your behavior. Right? I'll explain you with a very, day-to-day example. If you are a manager, I come to you as your team member and I crack a joke. And one fine day you laugh at it. The second day you just, take me for a ride that this is not a professional behavior, how are you behaving, etc., etc. That inconsistency in your behavior will create that distance between our working relationship. So how consistent are you in your behavior as a leader? Differentiates a lot. How a leader reacts when things go wrong. Those signals will shape up how effectively you are leading your team, right? And that is something far more value adding than any other textbook Gyan which I have learned. That is the second piece on how we can lead our team. The third is on, and this is often the hardest shift, is knowing when to step back, when to let go, right? And this is especially when you're early in your career, right? You want to be visible, you want to be involved everywhere, and you think that that visibility is creating value. But and I have learned this a hard way myself. Right? At every certain point, right, you will have a situation where you will want to get involved, but for the betterment of your team, you will want to take that step back, right? And the honest truth is that everything still depends on you. The system hasn't scaled. If you are a true leader, you will make systems and teams capable enough to run on their own in your absence too. Okay, so I think that is something we as leaders should look into. And I think one more aspect which is not talked about enough is that the real challenge of stepping back, that it requires unlearning. Okay, you will have your own ways of working. You will have your own, thought process. You will have your own mechanisms to deliver things. But then, how do you also unlearn? How do you also let others take charge? Right? I think that is something which I have also learned in my experience, and that has actually helped me build different perspectives about different subjects. So I think these three things basically have helped me be a better leader and make my team more effective in overall perspective. Is like that, you know, question where you can't give enough to the community. Uh, I think, I'll take a shot at it and I'll say it very, very plainly, because I think that is to be said very plainly, that organizations don't change through programs or policies; they change through decisions, right? Especially when you are in HR, right? Who gets hired, who gets promoted, how performance gets evaluated, how the trade-offs get handled when business pressure meets people priorities, right? I think us as HR, we sit very, very close to all these, situations, closer than almost every other function in the organization. And I think that proximity is either the greatest opportunity for us, or it is the greatest missed opportunity for us, depending entirely how we as HR choose to show up. Right? So the function itself has been measured by activities, and we see a lot of memes, a lot of jokes flying around, right? But how many of these initiatives were launched? How many surveys were completed? How many conversations were facilitated? And while those things have been in their place, they're not as same as the impact. We talked about the engagement survey earlier, right? From an activity point of view, engagement survey was completed. We, blew our own trumpet that engagement survey was very good. We had 99% engagement, but did we actually solve things, right? So that is the first thing. Are you measuring it by activity, or are you measuring it by impact? Right? The shift that is needed is going from being activity driven to impact driven, and that is one thing which should take as HR professionals, right? And the real difference between saying here are three options of doing this activity, are we saying that what I think you should do, and here is why we should do, and what impact will it create? Okay. The second one will create more credibility for you. The second stance which you are taking will earn that seat on the table for you. Right? Otherwise, we will always be activity driven function. Because credibility will not come from being involved everywhere, right? It will come from specific and special moments, moments where people walk out of a conversation and say that that became clearer because HR was there in the room. Right? So that is something which I feel as HR professional we should take, and in almost all the organizations, people don't experience culture or intent. They experience that how clearly, consistently, and thoughtfully decisions were made. And as I mentioned earlier, the proximity of HR in almost all the decisions we take around people is immense, and we should leverage that seat we have on the table and that proximity and that privilege we have to influence and impact a lot of lives positively.